grave site with actual bodies that they found?
No,
Or
no, no. There was just
a
like
little...
there was like women's. He had like this site that he put like women's clothes on and like jewelry around, and he would like pray to it.
Kind of a red flag.
Yeah, no, there
I
was a
think
lot of red
that's-
flags.
I
There
think
was,
that's kind of
there was a
alarming.
ton of red flags, right?
Have you ever worked on a case where you believed your client was guilty?
Oh, all the time.
Is that hard to... Because obviously it's important that somebody represents them,
Yeah.
right? Has that been hard to morally kind of rectify? Or how do you deal with that?
No, it's not, because it's a job, right? So the way that I see it is, I have this obligation to be a zealous advocate for my client, and that's to make every reasonable argument on their behalf. And the way that I had approached being a district attorney, I was deputy DA, it was very much the same in a lot of ways. I'd get a case in and I'd be looking at it at charging. I'd read the case and I'm like, oh, we got a pretty serious search issue here. I think they might have illegally detained this guy, even though we found that he had guns and drugs after the search. And, as hard as that can be, if it's just a clear, sometimes there's a gray area, but if it's just a clear illegal search, I just call the officer and be like, hey, let's talk about this search. Let's improve. Here's where I see the mistakes are. Maybe there's some stuff you could fill me in about that you don't have on paper. If there is, let me hear, exactly how it was done. If they have the body worn camera, then I can, watch or dash cam, I can watch how a stop was made or whatever. But if it's clear, then all right, I'm not going to file this case because we're going to lose. What we'll do is we'll file it. They'll file a motion to suppress. They'll win. Won't have any evidence, and the person will go. So we've wasted the resources, essentially, if it's a clear case. As a public defender, I'm now sitting here waiting for those cases to come through, and I've been, getting the cases, looking, and going, oh, there's a search issue, and then filing it, and then we litigate it, and then my client goes free. So what was the point of them filing it and doing all that if you know the law and understand the context? You just wasted resources and time, valuable court time. But again, if it's a closer call, then yeah, litigate it, argue it out. But sometimes it's clear. And I've been, winning those cases as a public defender. But, part of that was because when I was at the DA's office, Maggie Fleming sent me to training to be the expert in search warrants and informants and those issues. And it's really now ironic that she's trying to spin this conversation into like, that I was fired because I withheld evidence or I talked to a witness. And if you read my memo, it's that, they posted on Lost Coast. I spell it out very clearly. One, you're the person that sent me to be the expert on this. I'm the expert. I know the exact context. This isn't anything remotely like that. This isn't talking to a witness. This is talking to a person that heard a rumor. Why would that rumor matter if it's not admissible in court or anything? It could give us a little piece of evidence if there is corroborating evidence that we already have. And that's what we had. We had these 4 cases against a defendant, one being a murder case. We had 4 cases that nobody in the sheriff's department read together. And if you read those cases together, because I'm prosecuting the guy, so in all 4 cases, I read them together, you see these common threats, these common things. Like one is that he would put a gun to someone's head, and this happened 2 different witnesses, 2 different times, telling 2 different cops. Put a gun to the person's head and said, look into my eyes when I kill you. So why are they not seeing these things?
I do want to take a step back because
Yeah.
I want to dive into that.
Yeah.
Because this is, for better or worse, this is one of those gray areas surrounding your campaign, is being fired from the district attorney's office. And this is in regards to the Ryan Tanner case.
Yeah.
Right? Do you want to just set the stage for that kind
Sure,
of from
yeah.
the beginning?
Yeah. So in 2020, I was assigned another homicide. I think at the time I was already had 5 homicides or something. I just got done with another homicide trial. And it's this Ryan Tanner case. You know, the basics of it are that, 2 days before the young man was murdered, the neighbors who had known Ryan for a long time called the police and said, "Hey, this guy just held us up on the road out in Edgersburg. Their neighbors, big dirt road or whatever. He wouldn't let us go by. He was holding some sort of semiotic weapon, and he was, kind of talking to himself or talking to a shadow person, like kind of looking back and going, should I kill him? Should I kill him?" Really, really scary behavior. He holds them there for, one of them for, I think, a half hour or whatever it is. One gets out a little bit early, and he's like, "You can go." That guy goes and calls cops and goes down, meets the cop at the end of the road, tells the cop what's happening. Second guy comes, separately tells the cop what's happening, and the story's the line. The police report reads that there wasn't probable cause to go check. I was like, absolutely ridiculous. But it also said that didn't want to go up there because, I'm a police officer by myself, and if there are guns up there, that'd be pretty dangerous. Okay, that's legit. But maybe we'll get some more people.
Probably a good idea. Call us a backup.
But
wait there, do something.
Event, they just said there's no probable cause, which was absurd. The just 2 guys are like sitting in their house the next day, and they're like, "What's going on, dude? We're scared." They drive from Edgersburg to Eureka, to the main station, talk to officers there. And the officers go, "Oh yeah, we heard something about this guy. We're on it." Okay, they go back down to Edgersburg that night. Ryan Tanner kidnaps Jason Garrett on the side on that road, puts him in the back of his truck, drives him to his house, slits his throat, and then takes him down with another guy that's kind of like that works with Tanner, that is like super scared of Tanner. Takes him down to his dad's like secondary unit, and they put him in a bathtub and shoot him in the head.
After slitting his throat?
Yeah. I think it must have been it was bleeding, and
but
they put duct tape on it after.
Okay.
But it wasn't deep.
So it wasn't like they slit the jugular.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so they shoot him, and then Tanner makes the other guy put him in the back of the truck. They drive up the hill, find a water tank, push the water tank to the side, and Tanner holds the gun while making the other guy dig a hole. They throw the body in there. Tanner goes back down, burns his dad's secondary unit down to the ground.
Which was where the bathtub was?
Yeah.
Okay.
And in the interim of all that, there was a girl that was with the victim in the beginning, and she had run into the woods. Tanner went back and she had like a motorhome down the street, maybe like a quarter mile. He went and burned that down. And then, as that was one case, that was the murder case. Then I'm looking at these other cases where he did very similar stuff, and it weren't amount to murder, but assault with a firearm,
threatening, with a firearm.
and those kinds of things. And in any event, when I get the case, we're working on it. I go out like with the initial search warrant. I'm assigned it right away, so I go out like on initial search warrant with an investigator, and I see the scene and give some advice or whatever, and I come back and go back to my other cases, and things are kind of trickling in as they do. Cases come right away, and one of the detectives was like, "I can't believe they left that gun," and I was like, "What are you talking about?" Like, "Yeah, they left the gun on the counter." And I was like, "What?"
This is after they performed a search warrant at his house.
So what happened was, the way that whoever was in charge viewed it was, this is the case we're working on here. This search warrant is for this murder. And they see a shot-off shotgun on the counter. And one of the other patrol officers that's there in the search is like, "Oh, I think that's the gun that was used in the assault of another guy in case number 2 over here. And they go, no, well, this is for this case, so we're not taking anything. So they leave a sawed-off shotgun on someone's counter who they are accusing of shooting someone in the head with a different gun.
Is that standard procedure? Okay, because that sounds pretty crazy.
It's bananas. Yeah. It's absolutely.
It seems like you would take all of the weapons.
Incompetence. And if you read my memo when I'm talking about that, because I mean Maggie Fleming parroted what the police would say. Well, they weren't there for an illegal gun investigation. I was like, well, what if they just saw a kilo of cocaine sitting on the counter? You think they would have just left that? It makes no sense.
Well, especially where it's a murder case involving a gun, you would think they would take all of the weapons.
Everything. And I mean, consider the fact that this guy, at that time, before I recharged it in special circumstances, because Maggie originally just charged murder. I recharged it to special circumstances murder for kidnapping the guy and then murdering him. That made it so he couldn't bail out. Before, he could have put his property up, bail out, come home. There's a sawed-off shotgun. Are you kidding me? So...
So they leave the gun. You hear about it.
Yeah. And so I, tell Maggie, and they kind of superficially write a search warrant, don't have us review it or anything. They send one patrol officer out. And I'm like, well, why, if you're going to go back out there, like, make it worth your time. We have, at this point, I had another sheriff's deputy tell me that he had talked to community members down there that said that this guy had been killing immigrants for years.
Tanner was.
Yeah. And I was like, okay. And then you look at some of these reports, you see these, the fact that he killed somebody and then buried him. And then you have the fact that he's assaulted numerous people with firearms. In there was crazy stuff happening where that would suggest that there was no proof evidence, but there was corroborating evidence that said, yeah, this guy, there may have murdered women and buried them. Like, he had this grave site that he would pray to, about 50 yards from his house. And there was just a lot of weird stuff like that.
Grave site with actual bodies that they found?
No. There was just there was women's, he had this site that he put women's clothes on and jewelry around, and he would pray to it.
Kind of a red flag.
Yeah, no, there was a lot of red flags. There was,
kind of alarming.
There was a ton of red flags, right? And so I was like, okay, well, if you're going to go out there, one, I told him I don't think the gun's going to be there anymore, but there's other stuff that we need to find. He attacked somebody with a sword, so we got to try to find this ninja sword.
So this is now the second visit to his house. And
so I'm like, if you're going to go out there, you might as well, try to gather some more information that would corroborate some of the stuff that suggests that he had killed a woman there, right? And then we could go back with a search warrant, and at that point you would need cadaver dogs, you would need heavy equipment, you need all those things, right? But if we're going to go out there, why don't you guys make an effort? Instead, they don't even send a detective, they send one patrol officer out.
And were you getting pushback on that from the DA's office as well? Or that was just the police?
They were just kind of doing it superficially because I was mad that they left a gun. So okay, well,
the police were.
That's how I took it, and Maggie as well. So
no cadaver dogs.
No, nothing. Yeah. But so me and the DA investigator assigned to the case, we both go out there with the patrol officer. He was able to get another officer who had welding equipment so they could get into a safe that they didn't get in before, which was filled with women's underwear. Just scary stuff. The whole thing was really scary. And so this other deputy tells me that one of these people knows me from another murder case that I had done in Southern Humboldt. And he tells me everything that he says. And basically, so I understand it's like a rumor that's not going to have any evidentiary value, except for in a context of getting a search warrant down the road.
And so this is the person that you talked to that was deemed as you visiting a witness.
Yeah.
And interfering in a sense by Maggie specifically and the DA's office. They had a problem with that.
Yeah. And so I talked to him on the phone.
Because that puts you in, or could potentially put you in a sticky situation if it was brought to court.
If it was a witness.
If it was a
witness that observed something or had a chance of being called to court, yeah.
And you knew that they hadn't been
Yeah.
prior to talking to
Yeah,
them?
because I talked to the deputy before that told me, I questioned him all about it. And he's like, yeah, basically he just overheard something in a bar of two acquaintances of Tanner. So one, you don't know how those two people in the bar know Tanner or know the information that they're saying. There's no foundation. There's no value to it. It's not like that we saw it and we saw him bury a woman or whatever. They're just talking about, oh, Tanner, kills women up there or whatever.
And so you went to talk to somebody that heard a room. It was basically a rumor.
Overheard those guys.
Hearsay, yeah.
Yeah, so we're talking about 2 levels of hearsay, 3
And
levels
that
of hearsay.
protects you from the fear that
That
the
I'd ever be
DA's office
called.
had. Okay.
And it would be in a whole different proceeding because we're not talking about the same case. We're talking about him murdering somebody else. So it has nothing to do with the other case.
So you were essentially protected from the fear that they had
Absolutely.
of it being murky
Yeah.
in a trial situation.
100%.
Okay.
And so I talked to him, and the only question I wanted to ask him was, when you overheard these people, did they say anything about, one, using a firearm? And he's like, no, I didn't get to that. Or 2, something about looking into their eyes, because we had that common thread, right? Then the sheriff's office would never know to ask because they didn't care to read all the cases together.
They're only looking at that one specific
they're looking
case.
at their one case. So I was like, so I just asked him, I was like, no. I was like, okay, that's it.
That was the whole meeting?
That's it.
And was it in person? You said it was a phone call?
It was a phone call.
It was a phone call.
Yeah. And so I was like, that's it. And then they tried to, I think the thing was, I was about the firearm part and the fact that nobody read all the reports together. And they didn't seem to, the supervising detective didn't seem to care.
Which also caused some tension. It seemed like
So
Maggie was upset that you were kind of pushing the police a little bit.
And that's what I think it was about, right? Is that I was rude to those guys. And I've, again, more law enforcement support than my opponent, Stacy. And so, people know what I'm about, and it's getting stuff done. And I don't treat people, I don't cuss at people. In this case, I did. And all I said was, if you're not going to do it, then I'll effing do it. And talking about writing the later search warrant. Because I just thought it was absurd, especially following all the criticism in Murder Mountain and all these missing people and not going for the Rodriguez case and all this stuff that happened just before, and the sheriff's department being so worried about it. And now you have this situation where you have clear probable cause. You have a murderer. You guys could have done something to try to prevent that guy from getting murdered because the neighbors had told you twice. Like, this looks like a big shit show for you. And the response was, huh? And so I was like, all right, I'll ask this guy. And it's not like I thought that information was going to give me probable cause. Added to the things that we had, yes, gives you probable cause. Sure enough, after I was terminated, they did all of the things that I said. They used my analysis to get a search warrant like 4 months later. And they made the phone calls while I was still in the office. Maggie had their chief investigator call and say, oh, I think there is probable cause now, using my analysis.
Okay, Tom's backing up a little bit. So this happens, you talk to the witness or the person who has some hearsay information. Mm-hmm. Maggie asks you to write a memo explaining what was done? Or she writes a memo to you? How does that play out?
So she asked me just a factual memo of what happened, basically talking about my conversation with the detective and that search warrant.
And did she reprimand you in any way for the actions, or just express that she was not
and
happy?
Then later she then said, well, I need to know the name of the person that you talked to.
And this is when you write that second
So
memo.
that's when I write the second memo. And then I wrote the second memo. I'm like, okay, because the writing was kind of on the wall there. I could see them
that she was upset
with me, and so that they were trying to do something. So
but she hadn't expressed that she was upset with you yet. Directly called you into her office, done any meetings?
Not expressly, no.
Okay.
It was, we had one meeting, and it was about the me being rude to the officer and being calling them out for not leaving the shotgun and calling them out
some negligence.
And they assured me that changes were made and all that kind of stuff. But that was a conversation that we had, and then she asked me then later for a memo for the name of the guy. So I was like, oh, that's strange. because she said it was a Brady type issue. And I was like, this has nothing to do with Brady. Like, do you know what that means? Like, this isn't.
I don't. What is a Brady
Yeah,
type
so that's
issue?
the thing is, so under
Brown, or what is it?
no, it's Maryland versus
Brady.
And essentially
That's what could have put you into pressure had it gone to court.
no.
Okay.
Oh, that's what the issue is. It is not remotely related to that. She's like, there's a Brady type issue, and I'm like, okay, so Brady requires that the prosecution turn over any evidence that can be exculpatory or mitigate a sentence. So that would be something that, like, there was another shooter or something like that, or like we had evidence that the person that helped the defendant, essentially anything that would help the defendant. How a unrelated case with a person being accused of committing other murders would be something that would help him is ridiculous. So it's clearly not Brady, and all Brady requires is, well, if we thought that, then we just give it to the defense. We just turn it over to him. What do we care? No one cares. If we, what are the defense is going to go? Oh shit, my guy is being accused of killing other people. Hope they don't get enough evidence on that. Like, so it had nothing to do with that. So the idea that she says a Brady type issue, I was like, well, that's strange. Apparently she doesn't know what that means, or they're trying to find a way to attack me because the way that she literally said it in their office was that I was disrupting the how'd you put it? Since Paul Gallegos left, they had to rebuild their relationship with law enforcement, and I was disturbing what they had cultivated.
She thought you were jeopardizing that relationship.
Yeah,
okay.
By calling them out and cussing at that one guy.
And she's telling you this after you've written the second memo, and she's called you into her office.
I can't remember if that was at the first or the second, but it was somewhere in there. And in any event, I was like, okay, well, I think it was before, because I took that into consideration when I was writing this thing, because, clearly my memo, one, explains what Brady is and goes through that entire analysis and how could you ever think this. And then I pointed out, we don't have a Brady policy in this office. I'm hearing rumors that a detective involved in this case had committed some unethical violations that we would need to turn over to the other side. But you literally build a wall or put your head in the sand to not let any of your deputies know this, which all puts us at risk of losing our jobs or losing our bar licenses. And she's like, there is no Brady policy whatsoever. I was lucky to hear that there was a internal investigation on a detective. So I put that in the memo, and I put the fact that they left the gun on the memo, and I put some other things in the memo that was just like, these are the issues. These are things. So why are you trying to manufacture this completely outrageous claim? It has nothing to do with what the law that you're even stating. And so I give them that, and that's when she didn't talk to me for a month. And then the next day took away at least 2 homicide cases without saying a word to me. And removed my memo from the file, which I was like, because I went and talked to the prosecutor. I was like, did you read my memo on this? And she's like, no.
Your first memo or your second one?
The second one.
Okay, which was the longer one.
Yeah, and she's like, no, what are we talking about? So I went and reprinted it and put it back in there. All of that stuff was, like, to me, insane. So I think the whole thing was they were trying to find a way to push me out because they didn't like the way that I disrupted the relationship with the sheriff's department. And literally that's, my relationship with law enforcement is super strong because they know I expect things to be done the right way. And when I, as I did in this case, advised, hey, this is what you should go do to find that shotgun. I don't think it's going to be there anymore because, I had other information from another detective that the house was ransacked the night after. It was the
convenient.
Yeah. And so, anyway, in terms of that, I brought in the neighbor, one guy that got assaulted by Tanner, and with my investigator, and I told him, hey man, we need that shotgun. And this is what I told the police. Ask the neighbors, ask the girlfriend, ask people down in Shelter Cove, in that Whitethorn area, people that might know something. And so we brought the neighbor in, and I was like, hey, can you start asking around for this gun? We need the gun. And he's like, yeah, I'll do what I can. 3 weeks later, gives my investigator a call. We get the shotgun. That was the first thing I asked the sheriff's department to do. Instead they wrote that superficial search warrant that started this whole chain of events. Anyway, so I think what it boiled down to was, I think, one, a misunderstanding of the law by Maggie to some extent. I could, as I prodded.
Which is a pretty big statement because she's the district attorney at this point. You would assume that she has some high level of competence
in certain things, but it became clear to me probably in my second or third year, I think the second year, that I really, when I, go to ask questions, the response was usually they'll go post the question on the District Attorneys Association's board online. And again, like I said, there was, some of those trials I did early on, I asked for advice and I went down there and followed it, and it turned out to be completely wrong. So I learned pretty early, as a lot of the other senior people in that office learned, was that her knowledge of the law isn't really that deep. And I'm not
That's not comforting.
I'm not saying that to be a jerk. I'm just saying that as in certain things, certain areas, I think she's good at.
She's well versed, but lacking in others.
And and that's part of the reason that it was confusing, that she sent me to become the expert in this area, and that person, to go one step further, the person that she sent me that training in 2016, the guy that wrote the manual on search warrants and investigations, 30 plus years in the Santa Clara office, a guy named Mike Galley. My buddy down in Mendocino sent him a message, said, hey, here are all the memos and stuff relating to my buddy getting fired, and could you take a look at it? He called me like a week ago, maybe a little longer now. And first time I ever talked to him, I didn't talk to him at the training, it was, one of those trainings. And first time I ever talked to him, and he's recently retired, 35 years, has written the manual 4 times over. He's the guy. And he was like, she just come from civil law? Like, this is completely ridiculous. You did nothing wrong. I was like, thank you. Can you please call the Lost Coast Outpost and tell them this? Like, that's what they should have done from the start. And he's like, sure. And my understanding from that was that the Lost Coast reporter basically saw this as like becoming a proxy war between my expert, who's not my expert, he's the expert in the state that wrote the manual that's in that office and in all the other counties' offices on how to deal with these issues. And then on the other side is, the person that Maggie talked to, who is, she's the godmother of the guy's kid, and she paid him, $50,000 to come up here and try a case. So is that really going to be a proxy war? And, again, they try to sort of shift what the argument was. Well, you broke office policy by talking to a witness. One, not a witness again. But two,
they seem to hammer that pretty hard online.
But two, that policy that she made us sign was done after the fact. It was done when I turned in my memo. She then had people come in and sign this policy. So I didn't break any policy because the policy was made after. Even if you would consider that a witness. I agree that in cases when you're talking to anybody that's actually a witness, you should absolutely have an investigator there. The idea, it was a misdemeanor attorney. She used to say, oh, well, you have to talk to your victims. But if they tell you something new, then just run down and pick up one of the investigators and have the investigator listen in. And then, in the memo that she wrote back, she says the opposite thing. Oh, because I was like, even if this was remotely close to any of what you're talking about, all I'd have to do is have an investigator talk to him. She's like, oh, well, that's not going to solve it. Well, that's what you taught us. All right. But anyway, the expert in the state was like, this isn't even a close call. He's like, reading between the lines, I can tell you they just sounds like they just wanted to get rid of you. I was like, yeah. And it was because I think they saw me as, one, a threat. A
threat for the DA position eventually.
Down the road. And two, that I was disturbing the relationship with the sheriff's department.
There was something that I read about the star witness, Chris Champagne.
Yeah.
And how His testimony in preliminary hearings proved hallucinatory, bordering on unhinged. He falsely claimed that Tanner had also murdered 6 Leos after killing Garrett, which was false.
Yeah.
How did that come into play?
Well, I was gone by that. It was reassigned.
You had already been removed.
Reassigned. I was working at the public defender's office.
Okay.
But
because that came up in relation to you, and I couldn't find the connection. That's why I wanted to ask.
Yeah, I had nothing to do with that.
I think that was in relation to why they didn't press harder on charges or something.
No. The reason that they didn't press harder on charges, and I talked to the prosecutor about this, and I agree with her to some extent. I think that when you put everything together with the other witnesses, it tends to show what parts of what Chris Champagne was saying was true, but he was a very risky witness. So I don't actually have that much of a problem with that. I think that overall he got off lightly, but and I don't agree with the manslaughter. But they had to make a decision there with Chris Champagne. Chris Champagne is a person that was what I was talking about was the person that dug the hole. So and his testimony went on for days, is what I understand, and I read some of it online and talked to some people about it, and it was completely nuts. If he was the only witness, then absolutely you'd be like, oh, this case is
dicey,
done, But and so I understand that part, but yeah, none of that had anything to do with me.
You were already gone.
I was gone, and yeah, and I knew that was going to be. I mean, that was literally one of the first things I wrote when talking to the detectives was, this is how the defense is going to play this case. They're going to point it at Chris Champagne, so we need to start countering that from right now. And so, it was obvious from the start where it was going to go. But yeah, it sounds like he got real loopy. There was another witness that was there, and I wrote this in the memo to show Maggie that I understand the difference, because Deputy Pryor and I were walking with this witness, and he was kind of going around showing, where things happened. This was one of the guys that got Tanner put a gun to his head and said he was going to kill him. And he said that Chris Champagne, when he drove him up there to go work on the wheat farm or whatever, Chris Champagne told him, this is where Tanner and I rape and kill girls. And I wasn't sure that Deputy Pryor heard that, because I was like, that's crazy. So I was like, and Deputy Pryor was just like, 5 feet in front of me maybe. And I was like, Deputy Pryor, did you hear that? Because now that's a witness, right? So it just shows that I understand. I was like, did you hear that? He's like, oh, yeah, I heard part of it or whatever. I was like, make sure you get that down, take the notes, and then make sure it's in your report. Because I understand that rule. But yeah, that also shows that Chris Champagne, with statements like that, and then his credibility in general, became a risky witness. And I think that's, why they ended up where they did. But at the end of the day, while I'm not 100% thrilled with how it ended up, I think that, it's a reasonable resolution.
Which was just a manslaughter charge?
Manslaughter, and then he pled to like 7 other felony charges from those other victims, including the neighbors. So
manslaughter seems pretty light for kidnapping a guy and then slitting his throat and shooting him.
Oh yeah. That's what, back when they had the death penalty, that's a death penalty case.
Yeah, that ties back into not being comforting information.
Yeah. So just to wrap it up,
wrap this portion up, you turn in that last memo, a month goes by without talking to Maggie. She starts limiting your cases, and then she fires you.
Yeah, so what actually happened was that Friday, she gives me her memo in the office with the investigator there. I'm reading it, and as like in front of them, and I'm going, this isn't true. This isn't right. This is misrepresented when I'm writing it. And they're like, well, you have to sign it, and we have to put it in your file because it's going in your
she wanted you to resign.
Permanent
right?
file. We'll get there.
Okay.
Permanent file. And I was like, first I was like, well, why don't you give me the weekend to read it? You guys just kind of push this on me, like, right at the end of the day, and made me read it in front of you and let me think about it. And they're like, no, we need you to sign it. So I wrote on there, I'm signing it to acknowledge that I received it, but I take issue with the facts and some of the analysis in there, because there was clear misrepresentations. There were some things that just straight up didn't happen. And so, one of the things I asked right there was like, who you said that I did this unethical thing about talking to the witness. Like, do you understand? And so I went and walked through, what a witness is, what the difference between hearsay and that this would never go to court. And this has nothing to do with any of the stuff that you're saying right now. And she was just like, and so I was like, if you have, authority, you're saying you talk to these state experts, who are the state experts? And she was like, her whole body like kind of shrugged, and she was like, I'll have to look at my email. I knew it was a lie right there. I was like, okay.
Because she couldn't name
Yeah.
She
And
couldn't
then,
name it.
now she names her brother, basically, Paul Scura. She names him. How would you not remember his name? That for one. But I knew it was BS because you could read any of the books and they'll tell you the answer.
Yeah, I believe her counter to that was that she felt flustered and that
Yeah.
you were slightly aggressive or something, and asking who was
Yeah.
your
So
witness?
in any event, I signed the thing, left. The next Monday morning, because she said she was going to give me the information, I just sent her an email. And I was like, hey, if I'm wrong about this, then I would like to, talk to these guys that you're saying are the experts. And then an hour later, she called me in her office and asked me to resign. And so it was calling her out is, ultimately what the reason.
Not owning up to the mistake she felt you made, and then
pushing
back.
Not owning up to if she felt that that was a mistake, but then calling her out, if that was a mistake, right? Then show me the authority, show me the law, tell me who your experts are, so I can talk to them and so the future I understand, even though I knew what the law was, and this isn't close, but if you're saying that, then give me the information. And the questioning of her is ultimately why she was asked for my resignation, and on principle I said I'm not going to, and then she said, well, you're dismissed immediately. And I said, okay. I said, that's a bad decision, but all right. At that point, hadn't seen the waste of resources and the stuff like prosecuting cases and not being decisive, dragging things along. All of that stuff had, having 5 murder cases and then being the vertical prosecutor for felony cannabis, environmental crime, arson, drug labs, doing all the asset forfeiture, all of those things. They broke my job into 3 or 4 people, plus having 5 homicides. And then I'm covering every day in court, covering, low-level felonies for a prelim. And so I'm just sitting in court, dealing with that stuff when I should be dealing with my actual workload and working on homicides that need a lot of help. And so I was all ready to get out of there. And then had some other job offers. And so it was, at that point I was like
ready to let go,
and my plan had already been, to run against her, not 100%. At that point, I was planning on running against her, and I think I decided, it was actually DA investigators that I went up to dinner with, and they made custom shirts that said AK for DA on them. And so like their own office, like, we need leadership here. We need someone that we can trust to build an office. And, that was kind of like the last thing. I was like, all right, I'm in. I'm going to go against her. She's a 2-time incumbent, but whatever. And then, a month later, she says she's not going for it, and she's going to, try to appoint Stacy to it, essentially.
Had you had any prior tension with Maggie? I know you mentioned them giving you helpful advice that turned out not to be helpful, but did you come into any friction with her prior to that, or was this a pretty spur of the moment thing with this case?
We got along overall, I think, well. I felt like, for the cases that I wasn't the vertical prosecutor, the primary prosecutor, so I had, my own, I did the charging all the way to post sentencing. Most cases, she does the charging. And for general felonies, she does the charging, and then she writes what the resolution of the offer is going to be to resolve it for the majority of the cases. So, the process is like we go down there and try to negotiate a case. We don't really have any authority to negotiate. We're like, well, this is what Maggie says, and then, they give you, some additional information or whatever, and then you have to go relay it. You're basically, I'm like, well, just call Maggie, relay it, and then you feel like you're the defense attorney up there, and in 90% of the time, I was just like, no. And I mean, here's a really good example of that. That probably happened a year or two before I was fired. I had this case, guy set up someone's backpack on fire at the bus stop.
While he was wearing it?
No.
Okay.
It was just like on the side.
Just contextually, I had to ask.
No, that's a smart question. No, it's a smart question. And he had also set a tampon on fire next to St. Bernard's School and put it in a bush. And then there was one other case. It was another kind of, he threatened another person to throw a brick at an ATM machine. You know, real high quality heist here. The guy very clearly had physical manifestations of Down syndrome. He was developmentally delayed. Like there's, you talk to him, no question. You look at him, you can tell.
It was pretty apparent.
Yeah, it was apparent. And so from the start, I'm like, well, I bring the case, I tell Maggie, like, saw this guy in court, I watched the body worn cameras and the way that he talks to and how scared he is and all these things. I think he's, just, I don't think it's someone that we want to prosecute or try to send to prison. I think we could probably find some sort of diversion here early. He was also a regional client, so he has a caretaker, a social worker. And so I'm like, why don't we just, try to, do some sort of diversion early? And I got big red pencil itches on the thing. No to that. We are going to prosecute this guy for strike arson as well as vandalism and attempted theft. And then this other minor.
Maggie
arson.
Decided this.
Yeah. And so I was like, all right, that's what the boss says, right? So it takes 4 times to get this thing to prelim, just out of court space. So that means 4 times we bring 3 law enforcement officers. I think it was actually 4 with the other case. 4 law enforcement officers wait all morning for a courtroom, don't get a courtroom, they leave. Taxpayers' money, officers off the street. 4th time we finally get it to a hearing. He's held to answer. I mean, there's no question. It was on surveillance video. It's not an evidentiary question on those things. And then another 2 months go by, and we're at trial assignment, the last step before trial. And she tells me, "Well, I was down there. She's like, I don't know if the jury's gonna like this." And I was just like,
"That's what I've been trying to tell you."
Yeah. And then she's trying to just ditch it off for like a misdemeanor conviction for all of this stuff. Just a misdemeanor conviction with no consequences. There's no community service. There's no jail. It's just like paper conviction, which is, what do you give this guy that's going to have a tough time getting a job? He's developmentally delayed. Now we're going to just, have a conviction to have a conviction. Okay.
And this is after getting it all the way to that.
Yeah. Makes no sense. So that's
stage.
what she takes, takes it over at trial assignment. That's what she does. And she asked me, or like before she does that, she was talking to me about the resolution really quick. And she's like, yeah, I just don't think the jury's gonna like that. And I was like, I literally went, why we're here? And I picked up the file and I turned to the page with her big red pencil and I said this from the start. Do what you gotta do. And
do you think that's because she just never looked at the actual case, or?
I don't know, but we wasted a ton of resources, again, by not being decisive, and we should have never, ever been in that position.